Welcome to Analysis. We used to call this discussion, but I'm thinking Analysis is a more accurate name, so we're going to try that out. We're also testing a bit of a format change. Rather than a bunch of smaller analysis episodes spread out, we're going to do one big full analysis of Kingdom Hearts 1 now that we've gone over it. The annotations up top will take you to different sections, so you can jump around to whatever parts interest you or watch them now and come back later. With that out of the way, let's dig into Kingdom Hearts. Because it was the first game in the series, it's a fairly simple story, meant to draw you in and introduce you to the world. It's also good to remember that, at the time, this game was a huge experiment, mixing Disney and Square characters with a truly insane idea, and there was no telling if it was something that would take off. With that in mind, the story by itself is a little more self-contained than the sprawling saga we have now would suggest. There are 4 basic story threads in Kingdom Hearts: Sora, Donald, and Goofy meeting and looking for their friends, Riku falling to the darkness, Maleficent and the Villain Club capturing the Princesses of Heart while Ansem lays in wait, and Mickey's journey to the realm of darkness to get a Dark Keyblade. However, we're not just looking at this game on its own, but rather in the context of the series at large. When viewed as a part of the Kingdom Hearts saga as a whole, there's a lot that's added to the story. Events that used to exist on their own suddenly gain subtext and a new relevance. Sora's journey is about him carrying out the promise he made to Aqua to protect Riku if he falls to the darkness. Sora inherits the Keyblade Riku is too far gone to manifest, so he can save his friend. Remember, Aqua was going to make Sora a keybearer, but she changed her mind because she didn't want Sora and Riku to fight like her and Terra did. Of course, she couldn't predict how far Riku was going to fall, and so she kind of guaranteed the two would end up fighting anyway. However, everything that happens for basically the rest of the series is thanks to the promise that he made to Aqua. Sora would never have been able to go on the journey he did if he wasn't there to get Riku's Keyblade. Presumably, Riku would never have been able to use it in the state he was in, so a bunch more worlds would have fallen to the darkness and the final keyhole could never have been locked. Sora's desire to save his friends is what moves the plot forward from here on out. As for Riku, he clearly mirrors Terra's struggle to find a balance between light and darkness. Like Terra, Riku is pushed into accepting the darkness and doubting his friends, and like Terra, his body is taken from him. There's a really frequent complaint that I see that Riku's fall seems to happen too fast. Because we only see him a couple of times after the Destiny Island, it can feel like he went from loving to hating Sora overnight. While it would have been cool to see a more gradual fall, I think a lot of people forget that Riku's heart has been on the way down for a while at this point. Kairi tells Sora right in the beginning of the game that Riku is changing. Darkness has already taken root in his heart. When the Destiny Islands fall, he succumbs to it fully, so that by the time Maleficent finds him, he's already well on his way. So really, it doesn't actually come out of nowhere the way a lot of people seem to feel it does. Speaking of Maleficent, she gets a real raw deal in this game. She is entirely a pawn Xehanort set up, and Ansem takes advantage of that. Back in Birth by Sleep, Xehanort specifically told her about the Princesses of Heart so that she would gather them for him, saving him some work if he needed a backup plan. It serves as a nice reminder of Xehanort's talent for planning and manipulation, and while Maleficent's role in this game is fairly simple, it serves as some killer motivation for her going into Kingdom Hearts 2 and beyond. Our girl's gonna come back swinging. As for Mickey's journey, we don't know all that much about it. The only information Nomura has given us is that it was a very similar journey to Sora's. He's been saying for years he wants to find a way to show it to us, but given that we're deep in Kingdom Hearts 3 territory at this point, it's unlikely we're ever gonna get the full story. So we've talked a little bit about the characters so far, but let's go a little more in depth on the main ones. Sora is a hero's hero. Endlessly cheerful, helping anyone in trouble without a moment's hesitation, Sora is a far cry from the brooding, burdened protagonists of Birth by Sleep. While the heroes in Birth by Sleep were probably a little more complex, Sora's simplicity makes him the perfect center point for the Kingdom Hearts series as a whole. Sora's an everyman, a normal boy who gets caught up in something much bigger than he is. Xehanort has a line later in the series that pegs Sora as unremarkable and ordinary, but I think that's selling him short. What makes him remarkable isn't his fighting ability or his power, things Xehanort values. His personality and openness are what makes him special. He is, metaphorically and literally, a light in the darkness. His heart forges strong connections to everyone he meets. Even as he was being born, Sora was doing everything he could to help people, taking advantage of his heart to help heal it. If Sora's ordinary, it's only because he grew up in such a peaceful and calm place. I think in the end that's an essential part of who he is, but as a result it's easy to underestimate him. While Riku, for example, is more suited to taking on physical burdens, Sora's kindness and empathy cause him to take on emotional burdens wherever he goes. Think about what Sora does even just in the beginning of the game. Even though he's already harboring another heart in his own, he's able to take in Kairi's to protect her, and then he inherits Riku's Keyblade so he can bring him back to the light. Sora's journey through this series is to bring people out of the darkness, to save the ones that no one else will or is able to. We have to mention Sora's sacrifice in Hollow Bastion. Sora gives no thought, no hesitation, to giving up his own heart to save Kairi. That right there is what makes a hero. Sora never puts himself before others. He's willing to do anything to help the people close to him. This is pure speculation, but I think that the reason Sora is able to receive Riku's Keyblade, a manner of transmission that is entirely unique to him so far, is that he has such a remarkable heart, capable of so much love and understanding. That's what defines him more than anything else. Riku we've talked about a little already, but it's worth noting that Terra isn't the only one he's similar to. He shares quite a bit in common with our main villain, Xehanort. Like Xehanort, he's dreamed of leaving the Destiny Islands, feeling like it's a prison. Whereas Sora and Kairi are more curious about what's out there, Riku feels trapped, stifled, and this plays a bit into his heart falling into darkness. Indeed, I don't think it's a coincidence that there are so many similarities between him and Xehanort, even down to their appearance. We've talked before about how Xehanort's evil doesn't come from his desires, but from the choices he makes to reach his goals. Riku in a lot of ways is kind of a do-over for both Terra and Xehanort. He's faced with similar decisions, similar desires, but by the end of the game, Riku has escaped both their fates. He's found the light within himself thanks to Sora and Mickey, but he's still going to struggle with how to balance light and darkness through the rest of the series. Now let's talk about Kairi. Kairi's a pretty easy character to talk about in this game because he spends 80% of it unconscious. Kairi's kind of a strange character in Kingdom Hearts, because she spends a lot of the series as more of an idea than an actual character. She is of vital importance to the next two games, Chain of Memories and 358 over 2 days, even though she doesn't appear in either, simply by virtue of being really important to Sora. I think her relationship with Sora does really shine in the beginning of the game, and then again when she wakes up. Her understanding and kindness show when she realizes that Sora is a Heartless and is able to restore him, and she's willing to get mobbed by Heartless to protect him. She also shows a fair amount of sass. When she's awake, Kairi doesn't take off from anyone, and it's easy to forget that she has an attitude. This makes her kind of similar to Aerith in Final Fantasy VII, who in most people's memories tends to become this beacon of purity and light, when in fact they're both hardcore ladies who will mess you up if they need to. Though she spends most of this game being essentially a plot device, the screen time she does get allows her to show both strength and a gamut of emotion. And her parting with Sora in the end is as emotional as it is because we're able to form a real bond with her in the short time we have. Luckily, as the series goes on, Kairi will take a more and more active role in the story, so we'll get to talk about her a lot more when Kingdom Hearts 2 rolls around. Lastly, let's talk about Ansem, Seeker of Darkness. Xehanort is kind of a mess of different memories and personalities at this point, and it's really interesting seeing how Xemnas and Ansem differ so heavily. Ansem is the first and only Heartless that we know of that has a truly human form and consciousness. However, he's still a being made entirely of darkness, and that gives him a fairly skewed view of things. Specifically, he believes that the heart's true essence is darkness, that everyone will succumb to it eventually and that we should all just hurry up and let it happen. But, I mean, this is Kingdom Hearts. I don't think I need to explain why he's wrong. The power of love and friendship will always win in this story. Ansem's tragedy is that he's incredibly single-minded. He has more of a chance than any other villain to have a huge effect on the Kingdom Hearts universe, as plenty of worlds fall to darkness completely. He should have been able to amass a crazy amount of power, but he misunderstood the nature of Kingdom Hearts and ended up getting zapped by it. The last thing we're going to do is take a look at some odds and ends of things that are worth explaining before we move on. I mentioned earlier that Kingdom Hearts was originally much more of a self-contained story than it is in context. There are a couple of small things that usually stick out to people as either not making sense or just not gelling with the story at large. The major one is that to a lot of people, this story seems to treat Sora's Keyblade as a singular entity, the Keyblade rather than a Keyblade, since of course a larger universe of Keybearers hadn't been established yet. This tends to stick out in people's minds a lot, but in reviewing the game's script, there's nothing that really precludes other Keyblades from existing. It's simply a rarity by this point in the series, and because Sora doesn't meet Mickey until the end, he has no real chance to meet anyone to bring him into the larger world of Keybearers. In other words, this is kind of a minor point that is usually inflated in people's memories of playing the game, and seems like more of a contradiction than it actually is. Next, a note about the Door to Darkness. I feel like I kind of glossed over it too quickly, so let me clarify here. Only beings of darkness can pass through the Door to Darkness. Riku and Mickey could never have used it, because they're beings of light. There's another door called the Door to Light that works the opposite way. When not using either of the two doors, the only way between realms that we know of is using the Corridors of Darkness. The danger at the end of Kingdom Hearts is that instead of a small number of Heartless crossing over using the corridors, thousands could escape through the door all at once. Once opened, the door could only be locked using Keyblades from both realms, which is why Mickey went on his own journey. Another thing that you may have missed is why everyone ended up where they did at the end of Kingdom Hearts. When the worlds were restored, everyone went back to whatever world they were on when that world fell. So Kairi, for example, goes back to the Destiny Islands, even though originally she's from Radiant Garden. Under normal circumstances, Sora, Donald, and Goofy would have gone back to their worlds too, but they chose to stay on the world that was reforming around the Door to Darkness because they wanted to look for Riku and the King. We don't know what kind of world it really is, because all we see are the green fields, but it at least appears to be close to the border between realms, as Sora is able to make his way to the space between them to find Castle Oblivion in the next part of the story. Next, let's talk about the secret movie at the end of the game, even though since it's in the future from where we are, I haven't really covered anything that happened in it. Even though he didn't know if the series would continue, Tetsuya Nomura couldn't resist ending the game on a somewhat open note, by sticking Riku and Mickey in the realm of darkness, and he added the secret movie at the end with some of his raw ideas for what a sequel could be. He was essentially creating a concept trailer for a continuation of the series, not necessarily laying down concrete ideas since it hadn't been greenlit yet. In fact, going forward and creating the sequels, Nomura and his staff had to find ways to implement as much of the imagery and ideas from the movie as they could, kind of reverse engineering parts of the story. The reason I'm bringing this up is that this kind of thing is often used by people to criticize the more insular nature of Kingdom Hearts 1 and the series as a whole, by saying that they're making things up as they go along and that nothing ties together. This is a claim often leveled at long, complicated narratives, and it's just kind of silly. It's entirely unreasonable to expect someone to plan out years and years of story down to every detail, especially when you don't know if you'll actually get to show any of it. If you only have one shot to make something, you don't want to spend the whole time alluding to things you may never get to show. You want to do some of that to inspire fans and build hype, but you have to concentrate on making the best single story you can. My favorite example of why this line of thinking is flawed is Breaking Bad. It's considered one of the finest TV shows of all time, and is lauded for how well the stories flowed together and how everything seemed so well planned. Yeah, well, it turns out that wasn't the case at all. Each season was worked on independently, just like most TV shows. Going into the final season, the writers had no idea how the series was going to end. In fact, in the season before, when they had flashed forward a couple of times to show Walt in the future, those scenes were completely arbitrary. They just wanted to build some hype. When they went to write the final season, they had to figure out how to fit those scenes into the tapestry they were creating. Kind of like our boy Nomura. One of my goals in doing this series is to show how seemingly disparate or unplanned story threads actually connect together, either literally or thematically. No, the series was not all planned out from day one. Almost no great fiction is. There are certain waypoints that I'm sure Nomura has tried to hit along the way, and a lot of ideas he had that ended up changing or being tossed out as the story progressed to new things that have been added. I mean, it's been more than a decade since this game came out, with lots of time to develop and see what does and doesn't resonate with people. I totally understand why people want to feel like writers have a clear direction and endpoint in mind, but it doesn't necessarily make for the best story the way you might think it does. Anyway, that idea has always been a pet peeve of mine, and this seemed like the best time to address it. Finally, the one mystery I can't explain? Pluto. He can seemingly go between worlds on his own, and has a mysterious note that Nomura has either forgotten to explain, or that has a specific purpose that hasn't come about yet. Pluto may be the strongest character in all of Kingdom Hearts. I'm calling it now. Thanks for watching Analysis. If you have any questions, comments, counterpoints, or examples, please feel free to share them below. I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to see more, you can subscribe, or you can follow me on Twitter or Tumblr to see when new videos come out. See you soon!